Hello, everyone, and welcome to Into the Terminal. Today, we're going to be talking about installing packages on Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Nate, you want to just jump on into the terminal?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, the critical path today is going to be we're going to install some packages, right? So this is pretty basic stuff, but it's core systems administration. You need to know how these things work, right? So we're just going to pick a package, and first of all, we're going to get some information about the package, and then we're going to go ahead and install it. So we've chose Wireshark as our guinea pig here. So we're going to do a list on Wireshark. We're going to add a star so it shows all the packages with that name. Right now, DNF list will, it's kind of like search, which we're going to cover later, except this lists package names, not other metadata, right? So this is specifically, we're looking for package names, right? So let's run that. And there you go. We got some results here. It tells us what repositories they come from, and it tells us their versions, and of course, the full package names. So if we want to get really specific and get Wireshark CLI or Wireshark Devel, now we know what those package names are. So we're going to install Wireshark CLI, right? And what this is going to do is it's going to tell us what the dependencies are specifically for Wireshark CLI and show it to us. And then it'll ask us, do we want to install this or not? And I'm going to tell this no this time around because we have another example that I want to show you. Wireshark also has a graphic user interface, right? Which is just called Wireshark. If I install both of those, then it's going to give me the whole suite and all the dependencies that go along with that. You can see here, there's a ridiculous number of dependencies that go along with this because Wireshark is a GUI-based UI, which requires X, which requires all the things that come along with X, right? So you can see this is going to go ahead and install like a whole suite of things on my system. So we're going to go ahead and say yes here. And it's going to go ahead and install all those extra dependencies and whatnot. And you can see this takes a little while because right now it's downloading all those packages, and then it's going to go through and do all the RPM transactions to actually install all these pieces.
So, Nate, what I thought I heard you say was if you were running server with GUI, you would have less dependencies because they'd already be there because you were server with GUI.
Yes, but so much cruft on your server that it's not worth it. Server with GUI. I don't know. What's your web console? Web console is the in between, man. No server with GUI.
So during these stages, right, it downloads everything. Now we're seeing it
Yep.
installing. So it's actually like unpackaging the files and putting them down in our directory tree. You can see some stuff about scripting to customize the machine a little bit. And then it ends on verifying and list.
Yeah, these RPM packages are basically like an archive of all the files that need to be put in place, but they also include a bunch of, I guess you could call it automation, scripts and whatnot that run to make sure that things are in the right places and make sure that things that have to execute after the packages are in place happen, right? And I think we have other episodes, or at least we have labs on RPMs that you could really delve deep into that. All right, so there it is installed. Now we can do our list again, which should be in my history right there. And it should show us now that we have installed packages for Wireshark. You remember before we just had available packages, right? So you still see all these available packages for things that we did not install. You might say, well, I still see Wireshark CLI there. That's because this is the 32-bit version and this is the 64-bit version, right? So that's why there's differences there. I don't know why you'd want the 32-bit version if you have the 64-bit everything else, but whatever. You've got
And
options.
one other thing to note in this output, notice that the installed packages under their repository, there's an @ sign in front of it. So it tells
Right.
you from where this package was installed from, which is more important when you start adding on additional repositories like the extra packages for Enterprise Linux repo, so you can see who's
Right.
providing you the software that's installed on your machine.
And that can be super important when you're thinking about, where do I get support for this package from? Or just who provided it in general, right? If you're really strict in an environment where you need packages that are signed or that you have software supply chain, whatever validation, you need to know what repositories those are coming from. So, good point.
Great.
All
Well,
right, and that's installing packages with DNF. Goodbye, everybody.
well, stay with us for the rest of the show. After the transition, we're going to be talking about a few additional topics for packages. Like we're going to go in a little bit more detail on the DNF list.
Hmm.
We're also going to talk about checking for updates and applying updates. Um, and then Nate threw in a really cool extra bonus on that
Yeah,
that you'll have to stay tuned to see. We'll talk about removing software and searching our uh, repositories for software. And then we'll end on a little bit of DNF history command and looking at our history of transactions and some of the stuff that we can do with them.
that saved my bacon in the past. Had to be included.
So stay tuned, everybody. We'll see you after the transition.
Yep.
All right, don't forget to mash that like and subscribe button so you can tell us that you like what we're doing and also be notified when we are uh, doing more events like this via our favorite YouTubes. So, Nate, how are things?
Not bad. I'm feeling like we had some huge event that all of a sudden we're on the downslope after, and I'm really not sure what to do with myself. So I have to get back into the normal day to day swing of normal work. It's crazy how much effort goes into Summit, and then when it all goes away, it's just gone.
Well, don't fear, Nate. We'll start that up again in December this year.
Oh yeah, I'm sure there's probably I could probably start planning like tomorrow already for next year.
Exactly. Um, so, some of you may remember that there used to be actually a couple of other utilities that we used to use for working with packages. So, if you're really old, and I see everyone remarking on the grayness of my beard, or scruff, as the case may be, if you're really old, you remember RPM, which is the RPM package manager. And we still use that as our packaging format. It turns out we still actually use the RPM utility behind the scenes to do a lot of our package manipulation, installations, removals, scripting, all that kind of stuff. But we have a front end utility that goes in front of that now. That's what DNF is. And we used to have an older one called Yum. And so in RHEL 8, we started shipping DNF to replace Yum. But in both RHEL 8 and 9, Yum is still there. So if you're out on the interwebs and you are looking at a tutorial and it says Yum install something or Yum remove something, that will still work on RHEL 8 and 9. It works on RHEL 7 because that was the native package manager for RHEL 7. We just changed it in RHEL 8 to be DNF, and that's what we're going to be carrying forward into future versions of RHEL as well. The big benefit for that is that it uses the software repository configuration. So both Yum and DNF use software repositories, which is how we can automatically resolve dependencies and some other things. So while
Yep.
still doing RPM transactions in the back end, it adds on all this really nice functionality for figuring out what goes with what depends on what's provided by what through repository metadata and other stuff that we didn't
I
natively get with RPM.
I can absolutely remember my early days working with Red Hat Linux, and I forget if Fedora. I think Yum was included before we got Fedora, but before we had a package manager, not a package manager, a repository backing RPM, right? With like we got with Yum, just the tree of dependencies you'd have to go down to try to get a thing installed. It was sort of a nightmare.
Yeah. And I see also this is the time of the program where you can ask questions and chat. If you're in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
field, please feel free to leave a comment. And I see Shantanu asks, isn't the R in RPM for Red Hat? It was originally, but like all things, Red Hat open sourced it. And when they open sourced it, they changed the R to stand for RPM. So the R in
Yeah,
RPM stands for RPM. You're welcome.
Yeah, because it's not a Red Hat only thing. And while we'd love to get our brand forced down every other distribution's throat, right? It's not really the nice way to go. So it's the RPM package manager. Recursive acronyms for the win.
Exactly.
Just
All
like
right.
wine is
So
not an emulator.
jumping back into the terminal.
Is that what we're here for? Yeah.
I know. The other thing that we can use, there's like a whole class of commands that go with DNF. So in the critical path, Nate showed us DNF install to install a package. And he very
Yep.
briefly covered DNF list. So you can pass a package name with DNF list, like HTTPD, if you know the RPM specifically that you want. And what we can see from this list output is that I have one installed, but there is an available newer version. So this one actually has an update available. We can actually do a DNF list installed. Installed is a keyword that'll go through and show me all of the packages installed on my system and from where they came. We can also do the opposite, which is a DNF list available. So that goes out to all of my configured repositories and shows me all of the RPMs that are out there that are not currently installed on the machine.
You got to wonder why you'd want that when you could just search.
So, being an old gray scruff, um, sometimes I like to use this and send it to grep because,
Yeah, I've done the same thing, even though there are better ways.
well, grep has regular expressions, and I know how to use regular expressions really
Yep,
well.
that it
And
does.
so sometimes I do something like this and then pipe it to grep to grab out the thing I need because trying to craft the search term that needed to get to the thing I need was frustrating. So I just default to what I know. And then the other one that I want to show that I use a good amount of time is DNF list updates. So we saw that Apache, the HTTPD RPM, had an update available. Well, DNF list updates shows me all of the updated packages that are available for this machine. So we get their name, uh, their version, and then the repository that would provide this updated package to me. All right. So that is listing.
Mm-hmm.
Since we ended on updates, Nate, why don't you talk a little bit about applying updates?
Sure. So, I mean, kind of the bread and butter of every system administrator's job is periodically you've got to install updates. And if you don't, well, you're going to be eventually in trouble. DNF gives you some great tools to just install updates. I mean, it's really simple. DNF update will just update everything. But if you're trying to do some planning or if you're trying to limit those updates, that's what I wanted to focus on today because DNF update, whatever, it just updates everything that's installed, every package that's installed on your system. If it can find an updated version in your repositories, it'll update them. But as a systems administrator, sometimes you want to know, are there updates available? Instead of saying, go ahead and install them, you saw that list update that Scott used. I like to use DNF check update, which is a very similar output, very similar data that's handed to you, but it's in a slightly different format. I don't know if there's really a compelling reason to use check update versus list updates, but it's just the one I've always used, and that's what I'm going to base my extra commands here on. So sometimes, again, as a systems administrator, maybe you don't care about the feature updates. You care about the security updates. There's a flag you can pass to DNF for lots of commands that's just dash dash security. And what this will do is it'll give you only the security errata, right? There's also commands in here that you can tell it specifically check for this CVE, right? So if there's some headline CVE you care about, you can say do this CVE only instead of just all the security updates. Right now, here you can see that these are all the updates that are available that are basically related to security errata. Now, I could do like a word count or a line count to show you the differences, but you can see that the list of check update was much longer and the list of just security errata is much shorter, right? Just by scrolling through it there. But you can go even further, because there could be a case where it's, I'd like to apply security errata, but I really want to wait to apply anything that's going to force a reboot until a maintenance window, right? So you could do a check update, and you can exclude packages with certain names, right? So if we do -- exclude, I got to type here, exclude equals, and then you can give it basically a list of wildcard friendly names of packages you'd like to exclude. Now, I looked around. I was hoping there was just like a -- no reboots or something flag, and I couldn't find one. If one exists, I'm sorry if I'm not using it, but basically, I even found our own knowledge base on the subject, and it basically gives you a list of packages that will more than likely make you reboot your system. And they're things like systemd, the kernel, stuff you'd expect. So I'm going to give you a quick example of, we just want to say don't update the kernel. Maybe you don't want to update the kernel because you don't want to also update, I don't know, your GPU driver or something. This is a good way to get that done. So if we exclude the kernel, then you'll see it'll have an even smaller list. I forget if this one had a kernel update waiting or not, but if it did, it would have said no, don't update the kernel. If you wanted to exclude more than one thing, it's just comma separated. So if we wanted to do kernel glibc, which would also make a reboot happen. So I'm doing glibc star to say anything that includes glibc as the start of the package name. Maybe we'll add like systemd, because again, that's something that would require a reboot. And now it should be, again, if there were updates, you can see up there were systemd updates waiting in this last list. See them up here. Down here, they're no longer listed. You can see it skips right over systemd. Goes from SSSD to sudo to WebKit. So that's a good way to exclude certain packages. Now, it's not recommended that you exclude packages, but it's nice to have the option, right? So if you want to get a security patch in place, but you want to make sure that the system isn't going to require a reboot after, that's a great way to get it done. We're not going to touch on it today, but there's also kernel live patching for if you have to get a kernel patch applied, but you can't afford a reboot at the moment. That's not meant to be like patch and done. You should patch and then plan a maintenance window. But again, that's not the focus of today's show. Also not a DNF command, is it? Oh, no, I guess it is a DNF command now that I think about it.
Yeah, because the
Okay.
kpatch package is what installs that stuff.
Right. So again, DNF. All right. So we're gonna actually update it and show you what it looks like if we just do all the security updates. Right. So this is going to filter. It's going to do DNF update. It's going to do just security. We're going to add a -y so that I don't have to type Y when it gets there.
And Nate, while we're watching the package transaction happen, Shantanu brought up 3.2 of DNF using the -- download only flag.
Yep. Which
So
we
I
could have
know
done before the show to save time here.
it downloads pretty fast.
Yeah.
But when you're preparing for a maintenance, what you might do is, as you're looking at that transaction that you've proposed with DNF, and you are happy with it, but you're not ready to apply yet because it's outside your maintenance window, you could use the -- download only option, which would run that transaction and actually pull down all of the packages into the DNF cache, so that when it is your maintenance window, they're already on the system and you can just install them. And so it shaves some time off
Right.
of the activity that you're doing.
And if you've got a system that's been 3 or 6 months since its last patches, whatever your patch cycle is, this list of updates could be significant. That could be hundreds of packages. I mean, this is already hundreds of packages, and this is just a RHEL 9.3 box, if I remember correctly. So it's, from release day of 9.3 until today, it's a decent amount of packages. We had a 9.4 release in there. So, if I did the download only before the show, we wouldn't have had to wait for those downloads to happen, even though they were pretty quick.
Yeah.
So because this is applying the kernel update, I guess I should have excluded that to show my example. Then it would have been quicker. There's scriptlets that have to run. Same thing with grub. It's rebuilding the grub config, right? So these are those things that we talked about, the scripts that are included along with the RPM packages. I had one more command I wanted to show you when this is done. Otherwise, we would just go back to talking with Scott, but we got to wait for this to finish. It's almost done.
Yeah, kernels generally take a long time to perform their install.
Right. Okay, there it is. Now, there's another cool command that I learned about actually preparing for another episode of Into the Terminal. I didn't know this as a system admin, and I kind of wish I did. In the yum utils package, there's a command called needs restarting, which you can run that'll just tell you if any software has been installed on the system. I don't know if it's limited to just DNF, but that's the way I've tested it. But if there's been changes made to the system that require a reboot, if I just run needs restarting, wait, I forgot to install it. We're going to wait for this to install. This will be quick, though. If we just run needs restarting, it gives us like a list of transactions that have occurred. But if we just do it with the -r command, it'll just tell us like yes or no, right? These are the two things that have been updated since we booted the system that would require a reboot in order to take effect. So this is a thing that you can even script. Even the return code of needs restarting, you can just run it in a script, check what the return code was, and if the return code is anything but 0, then you need a reboot, right? So that this system, if I did a, you're not sure how to check what the return code of the basically the last command you ran, the return code gets stored in an environment variable that changes every time you run the next command. It's $? And you can see it's a 1. If I ran need restarting -r and it said no, you don't need a reboot, that would be a 0. So good way to script it, right? You can just have this thing run periodically and report to you, hey, these systems need reboots. So good package to have installed, good tool to have installed.
And I think that there's a changing understanding about rebooting. It used to be that if you installed a kernel, you needed to reboot
Right,
because you only load the kernel at boot. So if
right,
you installed a new one, you had to boot it so it would get loaded into memory. But we're starting to understand that we also need to maybe reboot after a glibc update where a
yep,
whole bunch of libraries that are loaded into memory and dynamically linked by applications need to be refreshed in memory. And the only way we could do that is to get them reloaded. And an easy way to get them all reloaded is to do it at boot time when the machine comes back up.
right,
Uh, the others, there's in the list restarting, um, there was also some like services that you could restart. So you could use your system to restart to remove them from memory and load them back into memory. That would make sure that you're running the updated version of it in RAM. There's
right.
actually kind of an interesting question. This one from Bob Woodrasa. Is there a switch to limit updates to a minor version so that you can only include 9.3 updates on a server? So I'm about to tell you something incredibly dangerous. So you can do something called version locking, where you say, okay, I want only this, only 9.3.
Right,
The reason it's incredibly dangerous is because when 9.4 comes out, your version locked to 9.3 system no longer gets any updates because there's no more stuff being produced for 9.3.
right.
And
You'll
so,
just stop getting updates.
right, so all the updates for newer things, all the CVEs that are closed, your version locked onto 9.3 system doesn't get. And when you do like a yum list updates, it returns blank because there is no update for 9.3 anymore.
Right,
Um, So instead, the better way to approach that problem is to identify what we call an extended update support or EUS release. And you can then subscribe your system to the EUS channels. And then when when that version no longer becomes current any longer, you will still get critical and important security errata produced for that extended update support version. EUS is an add-on subscription, although it comes with RHEL Premium for x86-64 architecture.
Yeah.
So if you have premium subscriptions for 64-bit Intel processors, Intel compatible processors, um, it'll be in there. But that's like the more sane way to try and version lock your system, because then you are still on the uh, version that you want, but you're still able to get critical and important security RATA even after the version you want is no longer in full maintenance mode.
Right. So yes, but right, that's the answer. Yes, but
Right. And you will find a ton of stuff out on the internet about version locking your machine. Please do not do it. That's like a
right.
terrible solution that will cause you long-term headaches um, for your distribution, because people think it's like, oh, I'm 193 and I'll just pull whatever, but
Yeah.
that's not the way it works.
Yeah, it's just not the way packages are tagged and produced for RHEL. It just, I'm sure there's some edge case where it makes sense to do that, but I think the vast majority of use cases, the right answer is don't do it. If you really need to do it, then you need to look into extended update support.
Yeah, and Bob said that he is in constant fight with um, ISVs that say they only support a specific version of RHEL.
Yeah,
Honestly, Bob, a statement that I hear from Linux customers all the time, and frankly, like I think we as Red Hat need to do a better job of educating our ISVs so that instead of telling you 9.3, which is not an EUS release, they should instead get on an EUS release that they want to maintain long term, and then tell you,
right,
use EUS, you get it for an additional X many years for this release. So for RHEL 9, there's EUS, which gives you an additional 18 months of minor release support for critical and uh, important security errata. And there's also enhanced EUS, which gives you an additional 3.5 years of critical and important security errata. So that would be the better approach. But I think that a lot of people don't know it, and the ISV community doesn't necessarily know it, so they don't make those decisions either.
right, right. And to be honest, point releases of RHEL are usually pretty tame as far as large changes. And most of the time, that's only because the app provider hasn't had the time to test against the new release. So they don't want to support it until they've tested it, right? So that's usually the reasoning behind that.
Yeah. All right. So updates. Nate, I'll let you scroll back and see if there's any interesting questions around updates that I missed. Um, the next thing we want to cover is removing software. All right. So earlier we did a install of Wireshark, and so we can do a DNF remove Wireshark. All right. So notice that it's removing 124 packages. If I told it to remove one, Wireshark,
Right.
where are the other 123 packages coming from?
It's all those
Those
dependencies we pulled in earlier.
Exactly. Those were dependencies that we pulled in for Wireshark earlier that we don't need anymore because we're removing the software. Um, it is not always 100% match between what you installed and what you removed, but it's pretty close. And this will clean off something in its dependencies. Um, if a dependency is required for something else, then it will remove it because the other thing still needs it. So we're pretty good at figuring out what to and what not to delete from the system. So if I just hit yes, bam, we're erasing Wireshark off of the machine.
And the cool thing, and I was reading the comments, and maybe you touched on this. The cool thing is if, say, you installed all these packages and they were the dependencies that came in with Wireshark. And then over time, you installed other things that also had dependencies that were in the same list of dependencies for Wireshark. DNF is smart enough to not remove the stuff that is now dependent on by other things, right? So if I installed another application and it needed, I don't know, UPower, which is in your list there, then that particular package would not have been removed as a dependency of removing Wireshark because this other package needs it, right? So
Yeah.
it is smart enough to do that. You're not going to break other packages by doing this dependency removal.
And I was monkeying around with DNF before the show, Nate, and I found something interesting that is an improvement over its predecessor, Yum. And you know what? I'm just going to be really dangerous.
Yes, I totally want to remove this thing.
Right. So it turns out that Bash is a pretty important package because a lot of our scripting and other stuff that comes with the distribution relies on Bash because they're Bash shell scripts. And so doing something like this can actually really mess up your box. But
Yeah,
check it out. No, DNF is smart enough to be like, you
you
can't do
cannot do
that.
that.
Your box.
That'll break
Uh,
everything. You really want to do that? No, you can't do that. You could
and
probably
even
force it somehow.
I tried. I put in skip broken and no best, and it has still said no, that it's a protected package. So
Yeah,
we can actually, with DNF, highlight protected packages that should not be able to be deleted. And that Bash is one of them. 'Cause
I
I did this once and
I bet you could
accidentally,
go forcibly remove it with RPM though.
yeah, you could do that because RPM doesn't have all the niceties of dependency checking and a variety of other things.
RPM's
Um,
like YOLO.
right.
Go ahead.
But
I'll
DNF
assume
can.
you know what you're doing.
DNF can keep you from like severely gimping the system, right? Like
Yeah,
if it's a third party app or something else, it probably won't know about it. It would probably happily remove it. But for things like your only kernel or Bash, it will stop you from doing that.
right, right. So Shantanu did have another question regarding dependencies, and I'll pop it up on the screen here. What or is there basically is there an equivalent of the dash dash no deps flag that you could pass to RPM when you were installing things? If you remember the dependency hell I talked about earlier, if you were just like like I want to install it regardless of the dependencies, you could do dash dash no deps, and I think you could also do that for removals. But
Yeah.
RPM didn't really traverse a tree like that to remove dependencies anyway.
So we
Um,
actually saw it in that error message for removing Bash. It said try dash dash skip dash broken, right? So like even if it was a broken thing, just ignore it and move on.
right.
So that's the thing, or dash dash no best sometimes has to be combined with it because it says even if there's not a good package match for what I need, that's fine. I can without a best package match, I'll do what I can.
All right, let's see here. There was another question. I think this was around the dependency resolution. I'll show this here. DNF will show the remove list, but not uninstall. Shouldn't it not show it at all? And then there was some clarification. I mean, shouldn't it declare a conflict and stop? I think with your trying to remove bash thing, shouldn't it have just said no before it even showed the dependency list? I don't
So
know.
it actually did. Let me toggle my screen back on so we can see it. Um, and we'll take away that. So
Yeah, I guess
you
it
can,
did. It stopped before
yeah.
this.
So as it was, it went out and refreshed its metadata from its repositories, and then it started to calculate the transaction. And that's when it figured out that this is a protected package and it shouldn't do anything. And so then it gave you that error message. And let me just give you a couple things there. You can actually see
Hold
the
on.
full message without our faces obscuring it. Um, so it says, I can't remove this protected package. Oh, because DNF, removing bash would have removed DNF as a dependency, which we can't remove DNF with DNF.
Okay.
So
So
yeah.
it was Shantanu threw some clarification in here. I think it's this one here. No, that's the wrong one. I hit the wrong button. Here. The chat moved on me. Conflict, yeah, conflict with two packages. So we were talking about the conflict where two packages depended on the same thing. The conflict with two packages depend on one common dependency, and I don't think it shows up in the dependencies list if it's depended on by a different package. So we
That,
didn't really show that well, but
that's correct. And then you can't have a situation where a package depends on another package and you try to remove one of them and they actually depend on each other.
right,
And if you do that, then DNF will also say, I can't remove this because this other thing requires it.
yeah,
And so you try the other thing and it says, I can't remove that because this first thing requires it. So you'd have to put them both on the same transaction to get rid of them both at the same time, because then we can figure out that, okay, by removing them both, we remove the shared dependency between them because we're deleting both of them. So
Right.
DNF handles a lot of that stuff really well, but it might require a little bit of finessing on the administrator's standpoint.
Yeah, I've only had a handful of situations where I'm in this situation where I'm trying to just do a simple, what I thought was going to be a simple DNF thing, and it leads you down this, okay, what is this error trying to tell me? Usually it's really good.
So Nate, we were going to talk about searching.
Yeah, let's bring me back up here. All right, so let's do some searches. We did a whole bunch of listings earlier, but search does more than just search for package names. It does search for package names, but it also searches metadata. So if you're like, I'm really not sure, what will give me this particular thing, you can do DNF search. And we didn't even touch on DNF provides or DNF what provides, which is another great tool. If you know the name of an executable, you can say, what will provide this executable that I'm looking for? And that'll give you a list. But we're not going to touch on that one in this episode because, well, we didn't plan for it. So we're going to do some searches. I've always done the very basic searches. So if you want to do a DNF search, and I don't know, I like Perl, I'm going to search for Perl, mainly because I know Perl has a ton of packages inside of our repositories, right? And you can see there's a whole bunch of matches for Perl. A lot of these are Perl modules. A lot of them are Perl extension things, things that use Perl that happen to have Perl in the name. I mean, there's just a ridiculous number of these things. But so what I really cared about was maybe the postfix modules for Perl, right? There's a thing called Perl postfix. I happen to know it exists, but maybe you didn't know the name of it, right? So if I wanted to do a DNF search with 2 keywords instead of just 1, now you might think, oh, well, that's going to search for everything that includes Perl, but also things that include postfix. But this is actually, it takes the 2 terms together and will search for packages that match both. And what it should give me is just the postfix Perl scripts, right? So if that's the thing I was looking for, now all of a sudden it's a lot easier to find. And you can see that it's highlighting the terms that I look for. It's not just highlighting them in the package name, but it's highlighting them in the description of the package. So that tells you that it is in fact also checking package descriptions, right? And that can be really handy for if you kind of know what you need, but you're not sure what package provides it. Whereas DNF list is, I think I know the package name, I just not quite sure exactly the wording or the spelling or whatever.
So Nate, I actually noticed something interesting in the output of your search. If you
Hmm.
scroll up, it'll actually break out the results for
Yeah.
it matched the package name, it
Yep.
matched the package description, or it matched both the name and the description.
Right.
Um, and that's really handy. One that I use often as example for that is Apache, because our package name is not Apache,
Right.
right? HTTPD. Well, how's somebody supposed to know that if they're just told install Apache? Um, and so if you look at there's a lot of things that say Apache because Apache project sponsors tons of stuff like Tomcat and other things. But if
Yeah.
you scroll up to packages, you'll see that HTTPD is in that list and it says Apache web server.
Yep. Name matched Apache common stuff, name and summary. Right.
But you just want summary.
Yeah.
It's only in the summary. This is what happens when we go off script. I stumped
Summary
Nate.
matched Apache. Right. And then there's
There-
HTTPD right there.
Yeah.
But to go back to well, you could like grep and stuff of that the output there, or pipe it into less so it's easier to scroll through or search, right? So good stuff. All right, so that was search. Yay,
Yeah.
search.
So I think that brings up our last example, which is history. So
Hmm.
what happens when you make a mistake um, with DNF? So DNF actually has a backing database, and every package transaction is logged in that database. And so you could see all the things that happened from this machine's instantiation until now that are logged in its database. And so you can see earlier I installed Wireshark and Wireshark CLI, and then I
Hmm.
removed Wireshark. Well, what if I accidentally removed Wireshark and I want to undo that transaction? So how about we do a DNF history undo 6. So it allows me to review the transaction it's about to undo, which is putting back those 124 packages I mistakenly erased.
Hmm. Yeah, you ever been in
And
the
while
middle of a maintenance window and you accidentally installed or worse, uninstalled a thing that is not either not supposed to be on the server or very important to the server?
yeah, or you answered yes to the question, and then you realize as you're like just happen to be scanning the list of things scrolling by, you're like, oh no, not that package. Uh,
As all the blood drains from your face as you see things being uninstalled that you know are required. Or if you've done another great example is you did DNF updates, and as safe as RHEL usually is for that, sometimes dependencies get updated that make your application break. And if that happens, you're like, great, which thing did it? And the clock is ticking on your maintenance window, and it's just I need to back out. You do a rollback, and you're back up and running.
yeah. So we'll wait for the process to complete, but DNF history shows you your list of transactions. You can also look at the transaction
Hmm.
beyond just snapshot. Um, but usually you realize these things quick enough that you can just, oh, what's the last one or two? That's usually the culprit. All right. So a lot of DNF today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
Shantanu had put a very useful comment in uh, in the chat here. Never press Control C during the install slash remove, and this is true because if it's part way through it, I don't know what that does to that transaction history, right? Um, and the only caveat there would be if you realize you've made a mistake before the transaction start, then I'd say you could probably still cancel it if it hasn't made any changes yet.
yeah, and the other reason you don't want to do that is remember we were watching it run scripts as it was
Yes,
doing install or the remove. Well, if you Control C, some of those scripts have been run, maybe.
right. Maybe, maybe
So
not.
right. So, like, did it complete the removal in a clean way, or complete the installation in a clean way, or now are we like in some weird unknown state?
Right.
So yeah, that we don't want to Control C. Instead, we can rely on that package undo to
Yeah.
the history undo to take care of it.
And I mean, remember, it's supposed to stop you from removing packages that will make the system unbootable. So you shouldn't end up in a state where you can't recover if the transaction is completed. You should be able to use those history commands to get you back to before you executed that.
All right. Well, I know that there's a couple other comments about like, what if we search this term and that term, and unfortunately, we
Yeah,
are out of time. Producer Eric would be sad because we're 13 minutes over. I thought we were
we
going to nail
still
it,
went
but
over. I thought we were doing great. I guess we went down a rabbit hole or two, and maybe we shouldn't have done that. Sorry, guys. No more questions answered during Into the Terminal. We have to meet the time.
producer Eric will be very upset with us, and we need to make sure that he is always happy.
I can see his head down right now.
All right, everybody. Nate, next week we're going to be talking about Bash.
Yeah, we have developed a whole bunch, or we've learned a whole bunch of tricks in Bash, either scripting or command line foo that can really help improve your life as a systems administrator. And we're going to dive into those things. Although I think next week is a recharge day, isn't it, Scott? So it's the week after.
It's in 2 weeks.
Yeah. Red Hat is kind enough to give us a couple days throughout the year, once a quarter off, and that is next Friday. So we will be happily not working.
So in 2 weeks, we'll see you again for Bash scripting.
Yeah.
Uh, don't forget to like if you like what you saw. Tell a friend if you think they would get some utility out of it. And my
Yeah.
last part statement is, oh, see,
Eric just popped into chat.
uh, so yeah, we've disappointed producer Eric yet again. Mission not accomplished.
And then he went and interrupted the outro. We'd be done by now if he hadn't done that.
Yeah, there you go. But yeah, until next time, Nate, any final parting words of wisdom for DNF and installing packages?
DNF is super powerful, but you can really get yourself into trouble if you do the wrong things. So just be careful, pay attention to the error messages, and use Yum history or DNF history. There I am dating myself. If you get into trouble.
Yeah, DNF history is a great way to recover from maybe having trouble.
Yeah.
The other thing to throw in there is that there are a lot of third-party packages that are great. So even though RHEL ships with like 10,000 plus packages natively, there's always a lot more. And so a great additional source for packages would be extra packages for Enterprise Linux repository,
Mhm.
which is a really high quality repository to add on to the enterprise Linux packages. And one of the tenets is it will not replace a supported package with an unsupported package, which is great,
Yep.
maintained by the Fedora community. So if you're looking for more software that doesn't come with RHEL, that'd
Yep.
be my first is EPEL or EPEL, the extra packages for enterprise Linux repository.
If you're not in a environment that requires the supply chain validation stuff, Apple is. I mean, I added it to all of my servers when I worked in higher ed because it's just it's so helpful to have those extra packages available.
All right, everybody. Until 2 weeks from now, happy Into the Terminaling.
Yep. Have a great one, everybody.